Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Dominic Binks. I'm Director of Business Development at Highfield, and I'm accompanied today on the webinar by my colleagues Adam Glynn, who's a Business Development Manager, and Mike White, one of our Employer Engagement Managers. Before we start, I'd just like to draw your attention to the top right-hand side of your screen, where you'll be able to see a dialog box. And within that dialog box is a questions box, and from here you'll be able to type any questions that you have that come up during the presentation, during the webinar today. We will be breaking periodically through the webinar to take some questions and to hopefully respond accurately to the queries that you have. You'll also see there's a facility to raise your hand if you have any technical issues during the webinar. If the sound's not coming through or the slides are not being displayed, then do let us know and we'll do our best to resolve that. When we finish today, there'll be a short survey that you'll be asked to complete, and we really do value your feedback. This is one of the first webinars we've done for Highfield Assessment, and we're keen to understand if the content that we're presenting is useful, is as you expect, and if there are other areas that you feel we could share our knowledge, information, expertise to help you as you prepare your apprentices for endpoint assessment. So it's really important to us that we get some good feedback, and we appreciate you taking the time to fill in that questionnaire for us. So we'll make a start. Today's agenda is we're going to give a quick overview of Highfield Assessment just for some context, and then the webinar is going to focus on the practice and process for completing your endpoint assessment. So my colleague Adam is going to talk you through the contracting process and the learner journey, and then Mike's going to speak to you about how we schedule assessments. Before then, Adam comes in to conclude about the assessment resources and support materials that Highfield offers to help your apprentices, to help your employers, and to help you be clear about what's required in endpoint assessment and ensure your apprentice is properly prepared and has the best possible chance of being successful. So just by way of context, Highfield has been approved as an endpoint assessment organisation since 2017. We've actively now been completing assessments for almost 2 years across a range of standards. We're approved for 37 and we have a range of assessment experience now in a number of different sector areas. We're saying on the slide there that we've completed assessments for over 4,000 apprentices to date, and what we're trying to do here is just share some of the experience that we've had in terms of helping our customers clearly understand what's required administratively and then a little bit more technically in order to complete and undertake a successful endpoint assessment. So Adam is going to take us through the first part of that journey now, which is the very first engagement that we would do, which would be in relation to contracting and ensuring we have contracts in place with appropriate training providers and agreements with employers. Adam.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm one of the business development team here at Highfield and cover the Midlands down through to the south of the country. I'm sure many of you have met me in the recent past, and I just wanted to cover off this part of our process, which you'll find that I or one of the Highfield business development team will be certainly heavily involved in from the beginning of the relationship with Highfield Assessment. So I'm going to walk you through the first stages through to learner registration. So this will cover the initial engagement that you'd expect to have with Highfield. So that would be with business development manager or with the employer engagement team. Confirmation of EPA services required, so really getting to grips with what you and your employers need of Highfield Assessment. The contractual process and the documents involved there, through to the need to register your learners with Highfield Assessment for individual standards. So I think one of the most important parts of the service that I can provide, or your business development manager can provide, is the initial conversation around the services that we'll provide to you as an endpoint assessment organisation. So we typically look to engage with you as the training provider, maybe even the employers that you're working with, and this will include obviously a conversation around the resources and support materials and our process around assessment. So really making clear how Highfield Assessment and the Highfield Group can help you and your organisation. If there's anyone out there that hasn't had that conversation with a member of the business development team, do let us know. We'd be more than happy to pick that up with you. It's also important from the outset that we understand operational requirements, and this can include the means of assessment that will apply to EPA, so potentially remote assessment, the costs and the options that you have around EPA, so that would be face-to-face or remote assessments, or indeed including or excluding resits within the EPA contract. Then we'd be looking at part of the process that I'll talk you through this morning, so employer confirmations, familiarizations too, which again we'll pick up on later on with the employer and the provider. This is really your opportunity, our opportunity to understand your business needs right from the outset. So organising support visits and additional training, maybe that you and your team would like for preparing to have Highfield Assessment come in for EPA. So, Highfield have spent an awful long time looking at how we can make the contracting process and the delivery of assessment services as straightforward as we possibly can. And I'll take you through the first and very simple steps in order to contract and register your learners. The first thing, and as we know, with apprenticeship reform, the choice of endpoint assessment organisation and indeed learning provider is in the hands of the employer that you're working with. For Highfield Assessment to remain compliant and for us to reflect the ESFA rules, what we do is ask for you to provide us with, or the employer to provide us with, a signed confirmation of endpoint assessment services form to agree what standards and costs, and that they're happy to use Highfield Assessment for that service. Now, there are a number of options. As it mentioned on the last slide, there are a couple of choices around EPA fees. So that would be something that we'd be happy to consult with you and your employer on. Again, remote or face-to-face assessment, including, excluding resits. And please do let us know if you need any further information on that. But this is what the first stage looks like. So employer confirmation of endpoint assessment services form. Yes, it's a snappy title, but it's very, very important that we do receive accurate and concise information on the form. So the first, it's only a couple of pages long. The main thing is that we accurately record the main details on the submission of this form. So what we're looking at on page 1 there, employer name, the company details, who the main contact at the employer would be in case there's a need for Highfield Assessment to directly engage with the employer at this stage. Then page 2 provides us with clarity around apprenticeship standards that will be delivered, assessment plan code. Obviously, there are, for some standards, a number of assessment plans available. Number of learners expected to complete their apprenticeship under that employer for the first year. That really helps us effectively plan assessor volumes and capacity needed to deliver the EPA at the given time. so when that's required. An anticipated first date of assessment, we understand that will change, and the learning provider details. And of course, going back to that, the cost of assessment. Now, this can be completed by, this can be actually pre-completed by the learning provider and sent to the employer for an electronic signature. It's fully editable, so it is an editable PDF. It doesn't need to be a wet signature, so long as we've got an email chain to provide proof that the employer is happy with the details that are being submitted. And luckily, if you do decide, or if the employer would like to complete that, there is a handy guide on page number 3, providing details on how to complete the main steps on that form. As we know, things are complicated enough without some additional guidance. So we'll give you, we'd ask for that to come through to us. So what happens next? So this would, we would expect for this to be sent to either your business development manager or a member of your employer engagement team. We've got Mike White as our employer engagement manager with us today, and he'll explain their role in this. But what we'd be looking to do is for you to send this through to us, which then would allow us the gift of the information that we need to be able to contract with you as the learning provider or the employer provider. Okay. So what will happen is we will provide you with contractual documents. It's in two parts. First off, the framework agreement. So we must contract with the training provider or the employer provider for endpoint assessment services. This gives you, the contract is in place for up to 3 years, unless there are any fundamental changes required within contracting or within the rules that allow us to provide that service. And it's non-exclusive. This is a really big point. It is the employer's choice to decide which EPAO they would like to assess their apprentices. Which does mean that then if as a learning provider, if that's your current position, you would need to be able to have similar contracts with other EPAOs for them to deliver the service chosen by your employer. Hopefully they'll make the choice to use Highfield, but again, that's non-exclusive. So again, the information that you provide on the employer confirmation form informs what we'd need to include on the framework agreement. So in part, service levels, our terms of business with you as the learning provider. And this will be completed and managed through Adobe Sign. So it's an online process, so there's no wet signatures needed. This will come through and be notified to you on email with the relevant access information, the links, and if there's a username and password. And we would ask for you to get that all signed up and back to us. It's just signed the once per learning provider, so we'd only need to do this the once with you guys, and then we'd look then at the second part of the contract, which is our employer information form. Now, the beauty of this is that the employer information form allows us to reflect any bespoke agreements within our contract on behalf of the employer that we'd be assessing for. It's completed once we've received the employer confirmation. The form would be issued to the training provider for signature, so it is not something that the employer has to sign. It's for you guys again. Again, it would only need to be completed the once, unless we update additional standards that your employers are looking for us to assess. And it outlines the responsibilities of Highfield, the employer and the training provider, whilst confirming the standards and the agreed pricing for assessment. Okay, so again, signed the once, very straightforward, all done online. So,
okay, just before we move on to the next bit of the webinar, we've got a couple of questions that have come in whilst Adam's been presenting, which I think are really useful. So the first one is just an administrative one, and to stop anybody else asking the same question, really, we will be circulating a copy of the slides to the registered attendees after the webinar, so you don't have to be scribbling down everything that you're seeing on your screen here. We will circulate that to you. Good question that's come in, Adam, from Debbie. She's saying, in terms of the employer confirmation form, where we have one major employer across several different sites, is one signature sufficient for all of the locations that the assessments could take place in?
absolutely. If it's one registered business, we would only need for that to be completed the once. The only complication, I say complication, the only time that we'd need more than that one would be where you maybe have had to, within a group of companies, contract with different arms of that same organisation where different locations were registered as businesses. But yes, in simple terms, just the ones.
So one employer, one employer confirmation form.
That's right.
Essentially,
yeah.
one employer information form. And then the other point that I just wanted to clarify with you, Adam. So what we're saying is we need one contract with the training provider, and then the employer information forms represent each employer and each standard that that employer is required to undertake assessment for.
Yeah, absolutely right. So one main framework agreement, and then an employer information form per employer that you work with, which reflects the details on the employer confirmation.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Adam. So Mike's now going to talk to us about, oh no, sorry, am I not?
No, Adam's going
sorry,
to.
Sorry, first technical hitch of today. So Adam's going to carry on and talk to us about the learner journey.
I am happy for Mike to do that, just to be clear. It'd save you guys earache as well. Yeah, so the next thing would be the registration of your apprentices with Highfield. So you guys notifying us which learners you've started to deliver to. So we would ask that you provide us with learner registration information a minimum of 90 days before gateway meetings are due to take place. This has huge benefits for us as an endpoint assessment organisation, and in turn you, because we can effectively plan assessor capacity for a minimum of 90 days ahead of when your learners will be due. I would please implore that you do this the same way that you have with your learner registrations on qualifications. Get this out of the way as early as you possibly can. It's in our benefit and yours. It's one less process to think about when you're preparing your apprentices for assessment. So please do provide us with a minimum of 90 days, but as early as you possibly can. Learners will be registered by us on the Highfield system, and we will provide you with access to our dashboard so you can review which learners have been registered with Highfield for assessment. The means of sending that detail is via an Excel spreadsheet. So again, along the theme of keeping this as simple as we possibly can for you guys, and us doing a good proportion of the heavy lifting, so to speak, you will provide us that information on that spreadsheet, very similar to what you've done on qualification registrations in the past. And the information that we ask for would be along the lines of learner details, assessment location, certificate distribution address. Then we'd be looking at the on-programme start and end dates, and the EPA start and end dates as well. Got to bear in mind too, if any of that information changes after registration, you can let us know, and we can amend that, and we can remove learners from their registrations also at any point. Accurate information at this time does make the certification process quicker, and that's detailed in the framework agreement. but again, it's a relatively, well, in fact, a very straightforward process for you to follow.
Okay, I think we want to make the point that one of the biggest challenges that we've experienced to date has been late registration of learners.
Absolutely.
So we ask, and the funding rules now state that that you're required to notify the endpoint assessment organisation at least 90 days before the endpoint assessment is due. But any prior notice that we can have of learners is really useful as we build our capacity to ensure that we can fulfil assessments when they're required. So early registration we would absolutely encourage. A couple of questions that have just come in whilst you've been talking, Adam. If you wouldn't mind just clarifying the signature position. So Rachel's asked us a question. Have I understood correctly that that an electronic or typed signatures are acceptable on an employer? You said registration form, Rachel, but I'm presuming you mean employer confirmation form or employer information form. So can we accept digital signatures on those forms, Adam?
Absolutely, yeah. The best way to do that is have the employer make or complete the form. If they're just typing in their details, absolutely fine. Just forward that on to us with the email chain with the employer just saying, "Here you go, that signed as requested," and then we can accept that rather than having a wet signature. It makes it much easier.
Great, and then there's two questions about fees, Adam. So Amy and Ben are asking if we charge a fee when we register the learners.
Absolutely not. This is something that we hadn't planned to go through today, but I think it's really important that you understand that. So absolutely no registration fee when you submit learner details. The very earliest that we'd charge for any part of the assessment would be around 90 days before that proposed gateway date. So if you're doing this on day one, there are no fees through until towards the end of your delivery.
Okay, and then if learners are registered and then that initial fee is charged, and then a learner leaves, how would Highfield handle that?
So long as it doesn't fall within the cancellation period, so the period during which an assessment's been booked, then any paid monies for assessment will be credited back to you. So again, this is a balance of fairness. You're providing us with that information as requested, and we do believe that as it's an effort that you've made, we shouldn't really be charging you for providing us with the detail that we've asked for. So yeah.
So basically, there'll be no charge unless the learner goes into the cancellation period, which starts I think at 15 days before any booked assessment. So if a learner leaves the process before 15 days before their booked assessment, then no full credit would be provided.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, you will likely see very few learners drop off once the learners hit gateway. And with our new process, that's when we're looking to book in assessment. It really does make sense.
Okay, great. Thank you, Adam. So we'll move on to the next section of the webinar. So once the learner's been registered, the learner begins their assessment journey with Highfield, and Mike's going to take us through that.
Okay, thanks very much, guys. So as you can see on the screen here, I'm going to take you through the learner journey. So the learner journey starts from the registration stage, which Adam has just spoken about. It then goes through to the assessment planning, scheduling of assessments. Your gateway meeting will be taking place. Assessments are conducted, results are then released, and then the certification claimed through the SFA. So the first bit is assessment planning. So planning of assessments will take place once learners are registered with Highfield. This is one of the key areas when it comes to completing assessments. We've experienced quite a few difficulties once the learner's been registered and prior to assessments taking place. So what we offer and what we will be looking to do is arrange meetings, site visits, and remote engagements as well, so that we can understand the role of the learner and also the requirements of the employer. That means that when the assessments do come to take place, fingers crossed they should go smoothly, and we'll be able to ensure that all the criteria that needs to be met can be met during the assessments. So once the assessments have been planned, it then moves on to the gateway readiness meeting. So the gateway readiness meeting must take place on the last day of learning or afterwards. The learner will be present during this gateway readiness meeting along with the training provider and employer. The meeting doesn't need to take place face to face. It can be done remotely depending on the requirements of the training provider and the employer. During this meeting, you will need to complete the Gateway Readiness Report. The Gateway Readiness Report can be found on our website, which we'll take you through later on, so we can show you where to download that. This will need to be signed by all three parties. Again, similar to the forms that Adam spoke about earlier, they do not need to be wet signatures, they can be electronic, that is absolutely fine. During the Gateway Readiness meeting, you'll also be collating information such as your functional skills evidence, your on-programme qualifications, and potentially, depending on the assessments completed, driving licenses, etc. Once you have all that information, you'll then submit that to Highfield using the methods provided. Okay, so once your Gateway meeting's taken place, it's then moving on to the assessment scheduling. Highfield have introduced a new hotline process to schedule assessments. As you can see, there's some benefits there within regards to that. So when you do call Highfield, you will speak to a representative. There is no automated service. You will speak to somebody on the other end of the phone. We will answer within 3 rings, is one of our policies. A date will be provided over the phone with confirmation in writing within 2 working days of the phone call taking place. We are flexible in terms of how we approach this, so should the phone call not work for yourselves, for the learners or the employer, we can arrange bespoke scheduling for large group bookings, etc. So once the assessments have been scheduled, we'll then conduct the assessments. The assessments can take place either face-to-face or remotely using technology. So we are flexible in terms of when the assessments can take place. We understand that not everybody works Monday to Friday 9 till 5. We can operate assessments out of hours. So for example, should a learner work night shifts or at weekends, we are more than happy to come and complete assessments then. However, what we would ask is that at the planning stage, we will be talking about when assessments take place.
Mike, can I just come in there? When you talk about technology, what sort of technologies are Highfield utilising to conduct assessment?
Okay, so we will be using for exams. Learners can either complete that paper-based or using our Highfield Works e-assessment system. So exams can be completed on screen, online. We also utilise a facility called LifeSize. LifeSize is very similar to Scout for Business. What that allows us to do is record the professional discussions taking place, and it means that we don't have to send an assessor out to stores or to locations, sites, etc., where learners are going to be present.
Thank you.
Okay, so once the assessments have been conducted, it moves on to the results. So results will be released within 12 working days of the last assessment taking place. These results are released via email and can be sent to whoever required. So should the results need to go direct to learners, we can do that. However, we can also send them to employers or training providers. The results email will contain a feedback report. This feedback is based on assessor-led assessments and provides written feedback as well as what criteria was met and which criteria wasn't met. Highfield also have a dashboard. Fingers crossed many of you already have access to the dashboard. If you do not, please contact the employer engagement team and we'll ensure you do get access to that. The dashboard is a great tool that you'll be able to utilise to track your learners' progress from registration all the way through to certification. Moving on to certification. So certificates cannot be printed by an EPO. they must be claimed through the SFA. Certificates are claimed after 10 working days of the results being released. Certificates are then distributed to the addresses provided during the registration.
Great, thank you. So a few questions, Mike, have come in whilst you've been speaking there. Thank you. So can you just clarify exactly when the provider or the employer or the learner should call the hotline for scheduling?
Yeah, absolutely. So once your gateway meeting has taken place, you can either call during the meeting, be a great time. The employer will be present as well as a learner, so you can work out diaries to ensure that assessments can take place, obviously at the best time possible.
Great, thank you. And then the question from Alison, do we have a test function for the online tests that people could access prior to completing their assessments?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a full mock assessment system for you guys to use, which will can be used with learners, but you can also use it on site to ensure that whatever access you're using will allow you to run those assessments or those exams. If you haven't had details of the mock assessment system in Highfield Works, please do let us know. I think it's worth us providing that as part of the follow-up to this as well. We do have a guide. It's also worth mentioning we do have a full guide on contacting us at the gateway meeting to the hotline, which provides an overview of the kind of information that we'd be looking to discuss that you may wish to consider before calling and booking in that assessment. Again, that's available through the employer engagement team, and also I think that would be something worth us sharing after the webinar.
Okay, great. And then another question, probably, Adam, this is for you. In some settings, due to firewalls or restrictions with technology, using some of the technology that we've suggested for assessment might not be appropriate. So are other types of technology allowed or acceptable? Is that something that we would cover in our initial engagement and discussion with employer and training provider?
Yeah, absolutely. We'd definitely, we'd love to be able to support each assessment, each environment that the apprentices find themselves working in. And if it's a technology barrier that we need to overcome, then let's have a look actually at what's available. What does the employer have available for us to utilise for assessment? What challenges do we have? Let's have a look at that before we start to book anything in. It's worth provider and employer really considering how an assessment can be delivered on site, and then for us to have that conversation with you well in advance of the assessments coming up.
Okay, great. And then if people opt for remote assessments, is an invigilator required, and what are the requirements for that invigilator to complete?
So yeah, an invigilator is required. So depending on standard and the agreement that we have with the provider, we would ask the learning provider or a representative from the employer who has been trained in invigilation or has read through our invigilation guidance for those guys to cover invigilation of the assessment. We would provide our invigilation policy in advance of that assessment taking place.
Great. And then maybe a question for you, Mike. Do learning results become available on the dashboard, and specifically any earlier on the dashboard?
Yeah, so the dashboard is a live system. It's linked directly to our Highfield Central system. So once a result has been released, it potentially will show on the dashboard to start off with. The results email will then follow shortly after the dashboard.
But the timescale is still the same. It's still the result we say is still
within 12 working days of last assessment method taking place. Fingers crossed, it's well before that.
Okay, good. And then we've got another couple of questions that we might have to take offline because we've got a bit more to get through. But one last question about invigilation: can the online tests be taken at the training provider and invigilated by independent invigilators?
Yes. Simply, yeah, absolutely. So the location of the assessment. So the assessment doesn't have to take place at the apprentice's place of work, and depending on standards, so long as it's not an observation. As an example, if there's a professional discussion, that can also actually take place off site. So not the apprentice's usual place of work. So it's all about an appropriate assessment environment for the apprentice. So give them the gift of having the best opportunity to be successful at assessment.
Absolutely, and that address will be asked during the hotline call, so one of our scheduling team will be asking that question during the call of where assessments will take place, and also you'll be able to receive the booking confirmation via email, which will also have that listed on there. If you do have any issues when it comes to that stage as well, that you find that the booking confirmation is incorrect, please let the Highfield team know as soon as possible. We can then ensure that, first of all, that our assessor is going out to the right location and does turn up to the right location when required.
Great, thank you. So the last part of today's webinar is to talk about the support materials that Highfield provide to help employers, providers and apprentices prepare for a successful endpoint assessment. So back to you, Adam.
Thank you, Dom. I love this bit because I think of everything that you have access to from us as an endpoint assessment organisation, these bits are the most critical for informing you and your apprentices around what to expect for assessment. So we cover these in two parts. So we have our Endpoint Assessment Kit and then our apprentice support guides or think about documents. The Endpoint Assessment Kit is our A to Z guide on how we approach assessment, what to expect at Gateway, Gateway guidance, how you can deliver that Gateway meeting, and also the Gateway documentation that's required when you're hosting that conversation with the employer and the apprentice. Amplification of the standards. So this is the bit that really informs what you should be delivering and what the apprentice needs to know at the point where an apprentice is assessment ready or has completed their apprenticeship. It's greatly important in terms of we're listing, the assessment criteria that need to be delivered as part of the apprenticeship, so the main standards within the apprenticeship. But then also additional amplification, so clarity on expectations around those criteria that in some cases can it's potentially not found within the actual apprenticeship standard nor the assessment plan published online. So really very important. Assessment summaries. So the Endpoint Assessment Kit provides you with a full rundown of approach to assessment. This is from grading criteria, which criteria will actually come up during that method of assessment, how we're going to approach that, so the options of face-to-face or remote, and really the detail that's important for you to, one, prepare apprentices for EPA, but also to be considered when planning for delivering or for the apprentice delivering the assessment. Then we have our mock assessment documentation. So taking what we give within the main body of the standard, the Endpoint Assessment Kit will create our mock assessment documentation for you to run the mocks for EPA prior to Gateway. It's a great way of informing the apprentice and the employer and you guys on whether that apprentice is assessment ready. What you should expect from this is that there are mock tests. So as we said about the online mock assessment for digital assessments, we'll provide paper-based or documented versions of exams. professional discussion, sample questions, documentation to that list the criteria for you to work through with the apprentice, and also further information on how we'll approach an observation and what needs to be seen during the observation with the apprentice.
Would you like to take you through the website, Adam?
Yes, so
okay.
What we, I was going to do that next time. Okay. So what Mike will do now is he'll change screens to show you where this can be located. So it's worth me pointing out that all of the documentation that will support this is readily available without the need to log in. We don't hide anything from you nor the employer, so you can get all of what Mike's going to show you and I'm rambling on about on the website.
No problem. So if you was to access the website, which is highfieldassessment.com, you'll be able to find all the information which Adam just spoken about just now on here. So I'll take you through a bit of a demo so you can actually find out where to see that. So if you once you're on the homepage, on the top bar, you're looking at Endpoint Assessment Resources. So everything you need to find, which Adam spoke about in the EPA kit, will all be on here. So if we're looking at business administration, for example, we'll go into the section for that standard. Okay, so as you can see at the top, we've got the preparing for endpoint assessment guide. So this is the EPA kit which Adam has discussed. So you can see the different standards that we're approved to assess in that sector. So it's quite simply clicking on the standard you're looking for, and then it provides a kit there for you. I did mention earlier about the Gateway Readiness Report. You can see this here. By accessing this, you can download the separate report on its own in readiness for your meeting. So that gives you all the information required in terms of the Gateway form. You can see also at the top, we've got the full kit available for you. So you can access this kit. What I would recommend is that should you go out to a meeting at any point, that you download the most recent copy. We update our kits on our website. This is the first place we would update them. So what I would recommend is that you access this pretty much every time you go out to a meeting. So you can see all of the EPA kits are all online. I'm going to pass you back to Adam, who's going to talk about the Think About documents now.
So the Think About documents are designed to support your apprentices. If we think about the time and effort that we've put into providing you as the learning provider or the employer provider a guide for delivery and our approach to assessment, we really wanted to also provide you with something that the apprentice can use in preparation for EPA. So the range of Think About documents that we have will be used during the assessment, so they can actually be taken in by the apprentice as part of their support package comfort blanket, let's say, during the assessment, as well as in preparation for EPA. So if we take, for example, preparation for a professional discussion, what you'd be able to do is use one of the Think About documents. The apprentice can complete that to note particular scenarios that they've come up during their professional development that they may wish to recall or discuss with the EPA during that PD. So they'd be able to make notes on this document and take that into their live assessment with the EPA. Again, they're available to download from the Highfield website. We'll break to Mike in a second just to give you an idea as to what they look like. So they're available for each and every assessor-led activity. We have them for the observations, the PDs, professional reviews, interviews, and also Think About documents for an employer. So what they can and can't do during a professional discussion if they wish to attend that PD. And it's just occurred to me that one of the things that really is worthwhile me pointing out as well, going back to the endpoint assessment kits, the EPA kits drive our developments for our assessment documentation. So all of that informs what our endpoint assessors will use during a live assessment, which means that there won't be any surprises at EPA. And of course, then the EPA kits drive what we then include within the Think About documents. So they're very joined up, very cohesive. So Mike, if you could show us where the Think About documents are found.
Absolutely. So again, if you was to access our Highfield assessment website, this is where the documents can be found, very similar to the EPA kits where we've just been to. So if you were to click on Endpoint Assessment Resources on the top banner, we'll use business admin, the section for business admin again, as it's quite a simple one. So go into the sector. Once the page loads up, if you scroll down towards the bottom, you'll be able to see there the apprentice support guides that we can provide. It's just a case of dropping in there, clicking on the one that you'd like. These can then be downloaded, printed if you wish, or used electronically. It's entirely up to you.
Within that as well, we've got some of the apprenticeship journey guides. So some of the guides that we've produced to walk a learner or an employer through the process for endpoint assessment. Again, what we found with all of this, with all of the support materials really, is that we've tried to provide them in some different formats for different target audiences. So the full EPA kit is really designed for providers and employers to really understand the detail about what the assessment requirements are, exactly what is going to be assessed, exactly how it's going to be assessed, and some of the documentation to accompany it. The other documentation that we've produced, the Think About, the apprentices, endpoint assessment journey planners, these are documents that you can use with apprentices or potentially with employers who have got a limited amount of time or a limited amount of enthusiasm to really understand the detail behind the endpoint assessment, and just depict in a more easy to use format exactly what's required, exactly what is going to happen. When we did the Think About documents, the concept came about simply because we were finding that the learners weren't always engaged with exactly what was required for them in order to complete their observation or to complete their professional discussion. So we tried to distill the information that's required in each of those individual assessment methods into more user-friendly documentation that the learner could use, can annotate, can even potentially take with them and have with them during the assessment, so they've got something to help them and help them to prepare to be successful in their assessment.
It saves the apprentice getting lost in the event too, so there's enough pressure on the apprentice in the preparation for and on the day, which of course our EPAs will look to try and ease them into the assessment process. But it does mean that they have, as I mentioned earlier, that safety net that if they do get lost in the event, in the conversation, lost in direction, they can rely on something that they've prepared and worked on in readiness for the event taking place.
Okay, so just a couple of other questions that have come in whilst we've been talking. So Claire is asking us, can we confirm if we inform the employer or the apprentice of their EPA result, as we're finding that sometimes that differs? So what is the arrangement for that?
So the results for assessment will go to whomever you've let us know to tell, to inform. So this can be checked when you book in the assessment when calling the hotline, and you can actually request through your employer engagement manager where that should go to. So the short answer is let us know where you need that result to go to. If it's just you or you and the employer, we can make that happen.
Great. And then Claire's also asking us for clarification about certification. So where are the certificates sent once they're claimed?
Okay, so as you know, we claim certificates through the SFA. Certificates are sent to wherever you instruct us to send them to. Usually it's on the registration point. We can also update you in terms of where sort of you would like them to go. So At the point of registration, you provide an address of certification. Usually that's the employer's address. However, we can also send it to training providers as well.
So again, this is about the engagement process really, and ensuring that you, the provider, are clear with us, the Endpoint Assessment Organisation, about who you want to be notified of results, who you want to be where you want the certificates to be sent following completion of the endpoint assessment.
Yeah, definitely. If you do find that you're not too sure where certificates are going, you think that we could have claimed certificates and you've not received them yet, please contact your employee engagement team. We are more than happy to help you in terms of finding out where certificates are.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. So that concludes the main areas that we wanted to cover in the webinar today. We've put up our contact details on the slide, and as I said earlier on in the webinar, we will be sharing these slides with you. So no need to frantically scribble down any phone numbers or email addresses, but we would welcome the opportunity to speak with you directly and answer any further questions that you've got. There are a couple of more specific questions that have come through that I think we haven't really had complete time to focus on, and perhaps need a little bit more exploration individually. So we will come back to you on questions that you've asked that have potentially not been answered. As I said at the beginning, it would be really great for us if you could complete the survey and give us some feedback on whether we met expectations today in terms of the material that was presented. If you feel there's areas of our endpoint assessment process or service that needs to improve, or you would like to see changes to, we'd be interested in that. And we'd also be very interested to hear from you about other webinars or other ways that we can communicate with you to provide information that will help ultimately your apprentices be successful on their apprenticeships and complete their apprenticeship journey successfully. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much for attending the webinar today. We look forward to receiving your feedback, and we look forward to working with you or continuing to work with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.